found him. I found Russell. Here he is. He's going to tell you a bit about the course that he's teaching in the School of Philosophy and Theology at the University of Notre Dame, which he's asked me to contribute to today in our discussion. So today's discussion is going to be one of the topics, the lecture topics.
Well, it's religion, symbolism, and meaning, and it's off the back of last week we did religion as discontents. So we did a lot of analyses that look at religion as myths or stories that try to comfort people because they can't handle the real hard philosophical truths that, you know.
So condescending approach towards religion and myth, more or less.
One of them is Arthur Schopenhauer, who very much has that. It's that the true philosopher can face truths, can handle the truth, and will find out that, you know, the stories you've been given in religion aren't the way reality really is. The world.
Did we tell people what the name of the course is?
It's philosophy of religion.
Philosophy of religion, okay.
It's mostly got a sort of contemporary analytic bent, which means that we do a lot of we try to do rigorous logical analysis of arguments and look at premises and follow them through and see if they're consistent with how we see the world, with our contemporary worldviews, that sort of thing.
Okay.
But last week and this week is a bit more of like, more, we would say in philosophy, continental philosophy, or also more sort of social analysis, social critique, social analysis, rather than just sort of the kind of armchair philosophical speculation.
Which is divorced from reality, let's say, and experience.
No.
We'll explain armchair then.
Well, the reason it's armchair is because it's like a mathematician, right? You have the concepts that you have, and you have your experience of the world, and then you sit and try to derive what you can from those experiences, the premises that you have. Now, of course, you can update and revise them with new understandings and new experiences of the world, but most of it is focused on, like, what are the arguments, what are the premises, what do we all accept as a reasonable premise, and what can we get from there.
Okay.
And there's a lot of things like arguments for the existence of God, you know, are there any sort of scientific critiques of religion, those things, whereas this one's more focused on not so much arguments.
This topic, okay, yep.
It's hard to explain, that's why it's not my area, hence why I'm discussing with you, because a lot of it is different in the sense of maybe there are some things we can't just know from reasoning alone or from experience, empiricism, that there are different ways of knowing the truth about the world that come through myth and symbolism.
Absolutely.
I'll be back.
Absolutely. Okay. We'll resume when you come back. In the meantime, I'm going to do my absolute best to kind of give a delineation of the major scholars that I'm familiar with, whose works I'm familiar with, that speak about an alternative way of approaching and addressing reality through the lens of mythology and religious experience. That comes out of the discipline of the history of religions, for the most part, in my case. I mean, that's what I was trained in, right? Scholarly figures like Mircea Eliade, the great Romanian historian of religions in the mid-20th century. But it has a genealogy that goes way back to the 19th century with the establishment or founding of the discipline of religious studies, or studies in religion as it's now called in the academy. So, you know, it's going to be difficult to do with these lovely chips and aioli sauces in front of us. Maybe do you want to eat a little bit and then we will resume?
Yep.
We're going to just get some sustenance, get some manna, participate in the numinous through food, and then we'll return to our...
That's a great book cover.
It's a great book cover, yeah. It's like the tarot in terms of archetypal imagery for Carl Jung. Okay, see you soon. That was a nice... meal, snack, whatever. We had our chips. Do you want to get into the frame here or not? Yes?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, well, you know.
But I think the best way to do this is to just jump straight into questions.
All right.
So I'm going to come at it from my perspective as a philosopher, asking questions about this type of material.
All right.
In order to highlight some of the points that I've been bringing up with students in the first 3 weeks and questions they've had. So the first one is, we've been talking a lot about so we have these different definitions of religion that we look at, right? Getting a definition of religion is really difficult, but there's somewhere it's like religion is about positing supernatural entities that you try to worship or get to know better or understand, find meaning through, which is like a very kind of modern understanding of it. Then there's some other interpretations where religion is about symbols and myths and finding a different type of meaning, not like truths about why we're here or the meaning for the universe, but like different kind of meaning, like a meaningful relationship meaning. And then there are other religions where another definition we've been using, which is like religion is broadly about events that go outside the natural order of things. So events that seem like they don't fit within the natural experience we all have everyday life, and that they're aimed at some sort of ultimate truth.
Okay.
An ultimate truth. Yeah, that could be broad, that could be a bit vague as well, but like a truth that kind of encompasses the universe and us and everything in it. So, to start off, is the myths that like Joseph Campbell talks about, these universal myths that we live by, and these archetypes?
The most famous book by Joseph Campbell, Hero with 1,000 Faces, which addresses the monomyth of the hero's journey. Yep. Yeah, so is he trying to get at the idea that there is a form kind of truth that you can get at through myth that wouldn't come through something like, say, a philosophical or scientific explanation for this is why the universe began, or some kind of argument that there's an all-knowing God that cares blah 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 and created the universe for this reason? Is it something outside of that? Is it a different kind of truth, basically? Someone like Campbell will presuppose the existence of God. And so will Jung, because he's deriving a lot of his inferences and conceptual categories, like the archetypes, for example, that arise from the subconscious in human beings, irrespective of context, geography, and epoch, like something that all human beings have in common, right? He's taking that from Jung, he's taking the belief in a divinity from Jung, and he's going to contribute his own conceptual categories as well, Campbell, okay? So he's an early to mid 20th century, he died in the 80s, I think. Comparative religionist, but he will presuppose from the outset a higher power, a higher truth that communicates to human beings, irrespective of the epiphenomena that we experience in history, society, culture, economics, so on and so forth, politics. It communicates via the subconscious, via dreams, and these, let's say, truths communicated by this higher power are the only way that human beings can psychologically deal with the world around them, and also if they learn to uncover what these truths are that are communicated in a more intuitive, immediate and experiential way, through the subconscious, through dreams, through intuition that are later expounded through discursive reason first and then language and then written down. If one can connect to them, one will be able to journey through life in a way that is fulfilling and meaningful. Okay. Yes.
Well, a few things, because last week we talked about Freud and Feuerbach and Schopenhauer and some other sort of sociological analyses of religion, and some of them are either there are these evolutionary processes which create these tendencies to have stories and narratives, but it's because it's useful to the society functioning. And with Freud, it's probably something more like the brain has evolved a mechanism to repress certain things, right? And then it can be unsurfaced in these narratives, right? Yes. But there's a notion of one that it's a societal control that produces these things, or there's a repressed mechanism in the brain, the mind, right? So what's going on different here?
Well, this biological approach is not something that Campbell would dismiss entirely, but the difference between someone like Feuerbach and Campbell, Freud's difficult to pigeonhole. He's very difficult to pigeonhole because while he might describe the, let's say, significance of mythology through the lens of psychoanalysis and in terms of repression and, you know, the myths using veiled, let's say, images and symbols in order to address deep traumas, right? That go back to childhood, that need to be enunciated in order for the person who's experienced these traumas to finally overcome them. While you have all these things in Freud, and while you might have a purely utilitarian approach in others or an empiricist approach in others, there's no reason for someone like Campbell and others like Mircea Eliade and Carl Jung for it to be both and. So for the biological, let's say, processes of the brain to be connected to a supernatural reality, if you like, via the mechanism of the subconscious, which is a realm of human experience that acts as a substrate for all conscious thought and influences conscious thought and thereby everything that we think about rationalistically, right? Because you have to imagine something before you think about it in a discursive way, irrespective of whether or not we are self-aware about these things. So this is why people like Jung, people like Freud as well, Freud had this strange, let's say, approach towards religion where he could see its purely psychological and utilitarian function, but then he was kind of in awe of, you know, he had like I can't exhaust this rationalistically, so I'm not sure what to do with it. In fact, he writes an introduction to the life of Moses several times because he doesn't know which angle to take. So these things are a lot more complex depending on the apprehension of the scholar. You can take a purely utilitarian or empiricist approach. I don't think that the more existential scholars like Campbell and others would deny such an approach, but they would say that we are subject ultimately, whether biologically or psychologically, to a higher power, and they're doing it in an objective sense. Jung will do it in a broad way by using examples from across world religions and various mythologies, but he's a Christian at heart. Yeah. Whereas Campbell is a little bit more relativistic, a little bit more perennialist, believing that all of the myths in all world societies point ultimately to this higher power, and they are the expression, let's say, manifestation of our coming to terms with the way this higher power communicates to us in life circumstances, how it is we're able to grapple with life circumstances in order to have a meaningful life. And we can talk about specific examples of that, like the hero's journey, after you make your comment, because I can see that you want to say something.
Okay, yeah, maybe I will. But the first thing, the empirical stance of Freud seems warranted that he can't make sense of certain stories, right? Because if they're accidents, right, in terms of evolutionary processes in individual cases, and that you have, let's say, some natural propensities in humans to behave in a certain way, and then the impositions of societal structures then breed these different manifestations, whatever it is, hysteria or melancholia or
histrionics or narcissism or whatever it is.
And the difference, though, I would think from someone from an empiricist tradition would say is that were your archetypal characters universal features that existed before the arrival of humans and not created by the very process of evolution, right? Mm-hmm. Are they universal characteristics, universal truths that you would have, like with before humans discovered mathematical truths? They were true before and will be true after the existence of humans. So is the idea that the myths are getting at some sort of absolutes, right, that might have particular expressions through our stories that could get it right or wrong? Or are they very local to the human story itself? Which, you know, feeds into the idea that they're not really metaphysical like truths.
Yeah, so that they're more kind of let's say nominalistic as opposed to realist. Yeah. So in other words, these things are, I guess, more or less functional.
I wouldn't say utilitarian, I'd say pragmatic. they're mechanisms that helped. They're mechanisms that help lots of different groups of humans across history survive their social circumstances. So where there are societies, you see these stories play out or get utilized once heard in other cultures over and over again because they seem to be useful.
Well, the approach of the sort of figures that we're looking at is that it would be both and. That they have this practical, let's say, application, but ultimately the practical application derives from a higher power or higher source. And just to give an example of how this plays out historically, let's say, in the up until the mid-20th century, around the mid-20th century, anthropologists and sociologists believed, right, that religion, let's say the formal articulation and response to these revelations from a higher power through the subconscious and through mythology and so on and so forth, which is an enunciation of those things that the human being taps into in the subconscious realm, or are a result of the conscious engagement with objects of experience that in combination with anchoring the subconscious lead to the articulation of a myth. It's almost as though they can't see we're trying to do something here. Okay. Anthropologists and sociologists believed, right, that religion, the formal response to these truths, negotiated through rituals and rites, was utterly utilitarian and emerged after the development of the first towns and urban centres as a mode of social cohesion in order to keep the tribe that inhabited this particular town or village together. And that can only happen around about the time of the agrarian revolution, about 7,000 years ago.
Gilgamesh time.
Earlier than Gilgamesh, right? Gilgamesh is around 3rd millennium BC. This is 5th millennium BC. So what happens around this period in history is in the region of Mesopotamia, in between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers, which are mentioned in the book of Genesis, in the first chapter of Genesis, you have the emergence of what we call the first towns. And they only emerge because human beings, both in this region of the world and in the Indus Valley, to the northwest of the Indian subcontinent, are able to irrigate their crops in order to develop a sustainable agriculture. So, if you're able to grow food in a sedentary location, then you don't have to go out and hunt as often. So around this period in time, you get the transition from hunter-gatherers to agrarian society. It's about 7,000 years ago. Could be a bit earlier, could be a bit later. It depends on the region.
Then you have individuals in the society that have to some has to be the hunter, some has to be the nurturer, the gatherer,
What you have is the development of artisans in this period, because there's a surplus of let's say persons who do not need necessarily to hunt, because you'll have some who are hunters going out into the villages. No, not yet. Let me finish this train of thought. And there are some who will nurture, but then there's others who will apply their imagination to developing more refined tools, to experimenting with art. And culture develops around this time as well, in a very increased way. But let me get to my point.
All right.
I'm not at the point
waiting
yet.
for the point.
Wait for the point. So, there was a discovery in the 20th century of a temple structure, monolithic, vertical, sandstone pillars arranged in a circular fashion in southeastern Turkey. This place is known as Göbekli Tepe. Tepe means navel hill in Turkish, right? And they've carbon dated this particular site to at least 5,000 years before the agrarian revolution, when human beings were still hunter-gatherers. Okay. So what that made anthropologists and sociologists think about is, well, what comes first then, religion or civilization? Because you have to be... No, not necessarily. Because there are no habitations around the site, even though they might have been made of materials that would have eroded over time, still there's no way to account for why such a logistical effort...
Wait, but wouldn't an anthropologist look at, tribes across the globe that hadn't had interactions with civilizations and have evidence there.
This site stands out. It's an exception to the rule. It's crazy. So what we have, for example, is the first time in history that we see the world's oldest temple, because it has zoomorphic reliefs carved into the marble, which means that these people were building tools sharp enough, to carve into the sandstone. And they were putting enough manpower into trying to erect these pillars in the T-shape. The animals that are etched into the T-shaped pillars, they could be, for example, apotropia, which means they could be animals that were worshipped through animism, that are used to ward off evil. It's a motif that we see throughout subsequent civilizations like Egypt, and before that in Mesopotamia and so on and so forth, going through Christendom with the gargoyles and grotesques on Gothic churches.
Where's the universal element?
Well, the universal element is precisely this.
Try and use the analogy to mathematics.
I can't do it with that because I'm not a mathematician, but what I can tell you is this. It completely stumped anthropologists and sociologists who believe, well, what's the practical utility then of religion if it flies against all practicality and utility? Something was going on in the minds of these people that forced them towards this practical enterprise of human construction, of constructing a temple, well before towns and villages that would seem the logical place to start in relation to starting temples, which are religious centers, would work. So, in other words, what people believed up until the discovery of Göbekli Tepe was that civilization precedes religion. Now they're thinking religion precedes civilization. Yeah, but what does that say about human beings?
So they had tribes.
Yep.
And the tribes. So if you look at bonobos, like what's her name? Oh, I can't remember her name. Anyway, look at bonobos and their structures, and they have like institution-like norms. So certain members get excluded if they misbehave, they get given certain roles in which to play in that. So if we think of primitive human tribes following certain rules in that, and then if they have some kind of animism or dynamism, right, in their belief about the universe, then they might think we need to build structures to relate to it. So that could still be like a utilitarian pragmatic use.
Well, so could it be both and?
Well, the thing with the both and is, this is the point with, when you talk about a universal characteristic like in mathematics, is you discover something, say, is mathematics truth discovered, or is it just a pragmatically useful thing? I come up with a mathematical, like, an axiom, a set of axioms and a system, and then I introduce something, and then that mathematical model becomes useful in a whole wide range of contexts. And then to deny many of those things, like denying the law of non-contradiction, or on a flat plane that two parallel lines will never meet, those things become unbreakable. And they're not context dependent, they're universal. So that gives you room to think there, well, the constant applicability of mathematical truth everywhere means they're universal, at least much more likely to be. Because in this case, I'm like, what are the things discovered that are universal that are at least unbreakable? If you got rid of them, they would follow, like, it would, so in philosophy of science we talk about the indispensability theory, not the indispensability theory, but what we say is, if I denied, say, the law of non-contradiction, or if I denied a certain statement like 1 + 1 = 2, I cannot then make any coherent sense in a whole wide range of contexts. Whereas, could I say that some of these archetypes aren't true? Am I going to find myself in like a sort of an apparent contradiction? Am I going to find myself not being able to understand?
Well, on some level, they are true insofar as these responses to the divine, what Mircea Eliade would have called hierophanies, manifestations of the sacred, that on some level, whether it's epistemologically or whether this epistemological, let's say, dimension is a response to external stimuli, objects in nature which are considered as vessels for the manifestation of the divine and so on and so forth. On some level it is true for the person experiencing it. That makes it subjective, but it's true for that person. But if enough people across enough civilizations are experiencing the same stuff, the same phenomena, which we know is the case diachronically and cross-culturally, we know that's the case especially from the beginnings of history proper, where we have the first written texts around the 5th millennium BC. It's coterminous with the beginnings of towns and villages, right? We have cuneiform in Mesopotamia. Later on, we've got Egyptian hieroglyphics. We've got Sanskrit in India, so on and so forth. After these texts, which come to us carved into stone and marble and everything else, right, and to clay, initially clay tablets, after they begin documenting lists of what the king or ruler had to eat, they begin to speak almost in a way that's almost disconnected geographically, right? And in an extemporaneous way, they speak about the same kind of stuff, which is a high god, various divinities revealing the tools of culture to human beings, establishing the first cities, human beings responding by building temples to these gods and worshipping them in these temples, cyclical patterns in nature which are part of cosmic order, any disruption of those cyclical patterns in nature, exemplifying chaos and so on and so forth.
What's Campbell's thing? Because
Campbell's
like Star Wars.
Campbell's unique thing is he calls what I'm describing now the monomyth, which means it's the same myth for him. I believe this is a reductionism, because I believe that there's enough that's different amongst all these expressions of religiosity, which means you have to contextualize them. Nevertheless, the phenomenon of religion and of responses towards the divine via religion is too ubiquitous to deny that it's something that's essential to the human experience, which I think makes it more than plausible for it to exist objectively. But that's me as a Christian and atheist, right?
But so would Jung and Campbell and that say, if you went to another planet and found conscious, self-aware species, so if you went to another planet and you had conscious, self-aware species, would they find mathematical truths hold there, right? Would they have the archetypes of Star Wars there?
Who knows? He likes to talk about hypothetical things here.
Well, I mean, have we encountered?
Well, before we jump to the hypothetical,
let's have a break, honey.
Okay, we're going to take a break and we'll talk about the specific and perhaps most interesting and fascinating manifestation of the monomyth. Don't yawn into the camera.
I can't.
Gosh, control yourself. I'm putting him to sleep. The most, let's say, emphatic manifestation of the monomyth. Perhaps we'll move somewhere where the utensils forks out being smashed. We'll talk about the hero's journey. Yeah, sound good?
Yep. Yes.
All right, see you soon.
Finding Roman water deity, and we were finding Roman water deity all the way to Russell on his phone. And now we resume. Yes, what were we talking about before
we had a break? Are you going to sit down?
Yeah, put it there so we can face that way.
Sort of face this way. Is that? Does that seem right?
You've got to get into the camera focus.
So let me finish.
Cheers.
Let me finish this argument.
Get into the camera. Look,
I am.
It's going to be the photo for the.
Actually, can I finish on this so I can press you on?
Are we going to talk about the hero's journey or not?
Oh yeah, you tell me the hero's journey.
Okay, well, let me just get the book out very briefly. All right. So, what is fundamental, I think, the most interesting thing, because it's a recurrent motif that comes up again throughout civilizations and throughout literature, and it has to do with the psychological and physical or external process of growth and going out from oneself through difficulty and strain, because difficulty and strain is part of our everyday existence, right? Being born into this world is to suffer to a large degree. How to cope and deal with that suffering head on, how to cope and deal with danger and address it head on, and to come back renewed and transformed in such a way that you benefit yourself, your family, and your society. And that's called the hero's journey.
Yeah,
and he maps it out across civilizations in this book here. You mentioned Star Wars a few times. That's why I don't want to drop this thread, because indeed George Lucas, after he read Hero with 1,000 Faces, he was able to model the character of Luke Skywalker on this journey. Now, if you look at the don't rush me. If you look at the contents page, which I'm getting to, Russell, I'm getting, just relax. You see that the this particular edition, 1949, so mid-20th century, begins with a whole analysis of Joseph Campbell's monomyth, how there's this one reality that's communicated, as I mentioned before, through the subconscious and through dreams and through in various ways. I think that's partly true, but I also believe in the hierophany that the sacred is revealed ad extra. It's revealed through natural objects and through, let's say, I believe ultimately it's revealed through Christ, right? And that's responded to. But I think the monomyth can go hand in hand with that. And then there's the hero's journey, the adventure of the hero. After the prologue on the monomyth, he discusses it. Now the chapters, which are divided into subheadings, subsections, are departure, initiation, chapter 2, and return. The departure is, well, you can interpret it on various levels. It's the departure of the son from the home to marry his wife. It's the adventure of his life that should be if the mother is in a narcissistic crone and the father has taught him to be a man, right? In most of these traditional societies. It's the departure to go on a mission. It's Bilbo Baggins being shaken by Gandalf to begin the journey, to become the thief, to join the band of dwarves in order to raid the Misty Mountains and to find the gold of the dwarves. And he finds the ring by accident, but they're looking to reclaim their home.
Yeah, I can't remember the movie.
Well, the book initially. Okay, so that's the departure. The initiation process has to do with, this journey is exciting and everything, but at some point you reach a crisis. At some point there's an impasse that it takes a lot of strain and a lot of violence against the self and maybe against others, external enemies, in order to overcome, in order to be transformed. This process can be you're fighting the baddie and you lose the first time. It can be the first crises in a marriage. It can be the first obstacles that in your profession or career that you have to overcome. Learning what a methodology is before you do your doctorate, for example. But the best example of it in these myths is the descent into Hades motif. The hero has to end up in hell, right? And in hell, in the underworld, which is metaphor in this case for the deepest and darkest experience that the hero might have, the loss of family, the loss of friends, his best friend might die, whatever, or he could literally be walking into hell the way that Hercules, Orpheus, Odysseus, all these great ancient Greek heroes did. There are Hindu equivalents
of crimes,
all these things. That's right, Boethius, that's exactly right. Boethius, the philosopher, being falsely accused of crimes. Jesus goes into the underworld, right? But Jesus is not just a conventional hero. As a son of God, he destroys it and comes back resurrected. So it's supercharged for him. But for everybody else, it's a point of transformation. And then they come back with the tools from the underworld, in other words, from that dark and terrible experience, in order to be able to complete their journey, because they've learned something new. They can finally defeat the big boss. They can finally save the princess. They can finally do something good for themselves, the civilization, and for others. And this is everywhere. And this, you could say, is part of the biological, psychological journey of the human mammal. Or you can say it's much more than that. And we have to learn to model ourselves on that archetype that's been expressed through the monomyth or expressed through the hierophany, the manifestation of the sacred. When the gods do this, we have to model ourselves on them, or expressed once and for all through Christ, who not only enters hell but destroys it, gives us eternal life. And that is the reality that will be initiated into, beginning in this life and leading into the next life, when our consciousness does not end, but it persists forever and ever, unless you end up haunting a place. Don't haunt me if anything happens to you.
But one, the presumption that consciousness carries on.
Get into the lens.
The problem that consciousness carries on is not universal or religions. Because if the consciousness can carry on, why have a body in the first place? Why be embodied?
Maybe it's a training ground.
But why not have training grounds without it? But anyway, apart from that kind of philosophical notion, two things that I'm going back to my critique. One, so Carol Gilligan's in a different voice points out that there are all these stories, right? And now you see them change. So she said there were always the ones about the male goes on the hero's journey, right? And the female stays at home, knows her place, waits for the prince to come along.
Females also go in the hero's journey in the myths, in Nana and others.
But that's what I'm saying. So how would you determine between, like in mathematics, something that's universal, applicable rule, and one that's not? So one that's not just an arbitrary myth, story, that's just local to civilizations and useful.
Isn't mathematics devised by humans?
Yeah, but
it corresponds to, let's say, reality, objectively speaking, but still it's a language that we use in order to describe reality.
No, because if you're a nominalist, you would just, someone could say that mathematics is actually just it's a useful construct.
But not for Pythagoras.
Yeah, but that's what I mean.
Having fun.
That's what I'm saying. It's a correspondence theory. But, like, one, is the hero's journey a universal archetypal story that's revealing a truth? Or is it one that's just local to a lot of different society structures?
I think it's both, bro. I think it's both. You know my position, because I believe in the metaphysical, I believe in heaven. So for me, it's both. For you, it doesn't have to be both, but we can agree to disagree as long as students and the viewers of Symbolic are aware of the debate between a more empiricist approach to religious phenomena and the way they are manifested in an archetypal way or sacred. Religion is a response to it through rituals and worship. Manifestations of the sacred can be described and analysed from 2 points of view. In an empiricist way, it's legitimate, or from a way that presupposes their ontological existence. In other words, that the sacred does really exist and is revealed through natural human-made objects, and religion is a response to that. And just, it's up to people to decide at the end of the day what they do. It's up to the individual.
Except if you are. I'll finish on this.
And it looks very metal. Doesn't it look very metal, everyone? The fact that candles...
just let me finish on this last question. Should someone go out like on a mathematical quest to discover the universal mathematical truth? Should they go on a universal quest to look for the universal myth truths? And will they be likely to find them?
Some ancient patristic authors, the early fathers of the church, basing themselves on the Greek philosophers, believe the fact that the universe itself is an ordered and meaningful whole points towards an orderer. So by way of inference, they would say that yes, the fact that there is meaning and order and purpose in the universe points towards, look, you can't have a clock without a clockmaker, you can't have a symphony without a composer. But okay, you might say, well, that's just an inference, perhaps, but based on, let's say, investigation of the harmony in the natural world. There are experiments that one can undertake in relation to the spiritual journey, but these have to do with the synthesis of that, to do with meditation, with prayer. They have to do with, the introspective, let's say, search for God. And there are certain common experiences and signs across civilizations and across religions, but especially across, I can only speak emphatically about the Christian faith, that point towards the presence of something out there that is also in here in the heart. Like the experience of the warmth in the heart and all these other things that are experienced by Christian saints and everything else. That's also empirical, but it's empirical from the point of view of the journey, the personal journey.
Like Campbell and that would say the same. You got to find it in literature and that. All right, good place to finish.
You think so?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That's really good, thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Until next time, we're going to get it together for which film? Deep Blue. Deep Red by Dario Argento. That's in a couple of weeks' time. Peace out. Peace out.
Peace out. I'm just surprised I haven't noticed this.
How have you not noticed it? All right, postscript. Come on. Stand in front of the monster, though.
My point was I lost...
The Japanese, I think, mask. Yes? A samurai mask.
I had forgotten to make this point. Mario never cleared up when he says something like some stories are more true than others. Like, are they true in the sense that they correspond to the way humans are, or are they true and then there's some like mystical realm outside of the world where the pure forms of humanness are there and all the pure archetypal forms are there and you grasp them through stories?
But I did say that's the case.
Sort of.
And the Christian perception would be that all of that is worked out in the Son and Logos of God before his incarnation. So he maps out all of the universal patterns upon which all the particular things in the world are made, right? What Maximus the Confessor called the logi, the principles of being, all right? And then they're kind of, let's say, deployed into the universe as he gives it meaning and order and purpose.
Wait, so are they in a Platonic realm like mathematical forms? Which
is in Christ from a Christian point of view. But most religions will say, yes, they are in a world that precedes this one, however you want to conceive of it. Those truths.
And so then if you go down that route, what are the mathematical demonstrations? So you have the mathematical pure forms, you have mathematical demonstrations to get you closer to them. do you have a sort of demonstration form for these archetypal myths? How do you categorize the non-mathematical truths from the real ones, or the non-archetypal true forms from the non-true? Like, how do you demonstrate that someone's saying that is an archetypal myth that's really, really true and that one's just bullshit?
Don't swear on my channel. Keep it kosher.
But anyway, I'll leave it at that. That's a question.
You can't leave it at that, because
that's
I
a question all you can
answered
answer
it by saying that there are different methods that can be employed. Some are more personal. Remember?
You can't have, if you get into universal truths, you cannot have personal.
But you can derive
aspects.
an objectivity through the instances of the personal experiences that correlate. So if multitudes of people are having the same experience, then by inference, there has to be something objective that they are experiencing, right?
But that's why I would say, someone would say, this seems like, it's like the Anthony Fleur's Death by a Thousand Falsifications. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
There's the story that there's fairies living in the backyard, and like, you go and look, I can't see them. Oh, well, they're invisible. Like, oh, well, if they're invisible, they'll leave.
Don't compare religion to fairies.
I'm not comparing that. I'm talking about your demonstration of archetypes being Platonic.
I did not mention Plato once.
But then if you say, well, there's ways of demonstrating it through personal. I don't have to hear.
Okay, hang on.
Anyway,
To be continued. All right, see you everyone.